So video now to talk about cubic unit cells. And so I want you to think about cubes, to think about cubic unit cells. And in order to do something with cubic unit cells, we have to think about what we have on a cube. So we have to think about corners that we have on a cube. 1, 2, 3, 4, and on the bottom, 5, 6, 7, 8. So there's 8 corners on a cube. We have to think about faces. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 faces on a cube. If we think about edges that we have on a cube, 1, 2, 3, 4, and the bottom, we would have 5, 6, 7, 8, and then each of the sides, we'd have 9, 10, 11, 12. So there's 12 edges on a cube. And so I'm going to switch over in a minute to my iPad, but I'm going to play with blocks for just a minute so that you can sort of see what we need to think about with cubic unit cells. So I want us to imagine that we have something on the corner of this cube. And if it gets next to another cube, I can see that it is going to touch, the corners will touch here. If I put another one in, these corners touch. So I've got 3 corners touching. I've got 4 corners touching. And then if I do the same sort of thing with a top set of blocks, let me see if I can grab these with one hand, and I go down here, if I imagine, let's say that these were pieces of cake here, and I had something that was sitting right in the middle there, I could have that piece of frosting or piece of candy or whatever, now is going to be touching all 8 of these cubes. So why is this important? I'm highlighting that if something is on the corner of a unit cell, it touches 8 other unit cells, touches 8 blocks. Okay, so let's ask the same question now about faces. What if I had something on the face here, right? That face only touches 1 other cube. So there would be 2 cubes here that share something that would be squished between that face, right? I'm going to think about edges. Let's imagine that there's something along this edge on this cube. Well, it would touch the edge of that cube, and it would touch edges up here. So edges might touch or be shared by 4 cubes. And if I had something, if these again were pieces of cake, and I had something that was buried in the inside of this cube, it would never be shared with another cube. So again, the way to think about this is we're thinking about if these were little pieces of cake that I had, and when I cut my cake, I cut something that was part of this corner. It may have been part of 8 other pieces of cake, right? Corners are shared by 8. Faces are shared by 2. Edges are shared by 4. And insides are shared by 1. Okay, so I'm going to switch over to my iPad now so that maybe we can try to see that a little bit better with that. So now I'm going to take what started with as our sort of 3-dimensional piece here, and I'm going to work on it 2-dimensionally, but I'll periodically pull this back up so we can think about it again. Now remember, we are talking about unit cells, which we often refer to as cubic unit cells. And so I'm going to draw a cube like you've probably learned how to draw a cube, right? So we can draw sort of a 3-dimensional cube like this. Right? There's our cube. And so when we have our cube here, we want to think about the kinds of surfaces that we have on a cube, okay? So we're going to think about corners, we're going to think about edges, we're going to think about faces, and we're going to think about the body. And I'll label those on our cube, and I'll remind you of what we looked at here for that. So when we think about sort of the number of each of these surfaces that we have, let's first talk about corners, right? And if we think about corners on our cube, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. We've got 8 corners that we can find on our cube, right? And we did that when we were playing with our actual cubes.
let's think about edges, right? And when I drew my cube, I actually had to draw 12 lines. So I'll highlight them here. 1, 2, 3, 4. Then we've got our bottom, 5, 6, 7, 8. And then our sides, 9, 10, 11, 12. So we are going to have 12 edges on any cube. When we think about faces, right? Might be easier, again, if we look at this. I am touching two faces, sort of a front and a back face, and then I've got 1, 2, 3, 4. So I've got 6 faces here. A little bit harder to label in two-dimensional space on my iPad here, but let's see if we can just put a dot on each face. So I've got the top face, the bottom face, 2 side faces, and then a front and a back. So it's a little bit hard to see that here. Easier with physically looking at a cube. I'm going to hold a cube by touching 2 faces, and then I've got 4 that I have there. And the body, really, that's the inside. There's only one inside of this. So again, the body, we're going to have here, there is one interior, or what we call body surface. Now, the other part that I want to highlight here is I'm going to call it real estate. And what I mean by that is when I'm talking about a corner on any given cube, I'm asking if there was something that lived on the corner of this cube because it touches 8 other cubes, I'm really only going to own 1/8 of that. Okay, so real estate here for corners is 1/8. Now, it's not exactly that it's this number just as a reciprocal, and you'll see why in a minute. When I talk about edges, remember when we had our edges that were sort of together. And for example, if I'm talking about this edge, right, on this cube, and I put another cube next to it, this cube is going to touch that edge. I can put a top cube that'll touch that edge, and another top cube that will touch that edge. Those are the only cubes that are going to be touching that original edge, right? So I have 4 cubes that are going to share that real estate. So said another way, each cube owns 1/4 of that real estate. So I'm going to put 1/4 here. Let's think about our faces, right? If I have cubes that are associating next to one another, and I'm talking about this face, it is only able to touch one other cube. Said another way, 2 cubes are going to associate via that same face. Because of that, each cube owns 1/2 of whatever might be occupying that face. So the fraction here is 1/2. And then when I talk about the inside of a cube, okay, they're going to be whole numbers. It's going to be 1 or possible more. Again, if I analogize these to pieces of cake that I cut, and if there was, say, a gumdrop or something that was inside, a piece of candy that was inside this piece of cake, depending on how big the pieces of candy are, as long as it's contained within the inside of this cube, it's not shared with any other pieces of cake. So definitely 1, but it's going to be, the key is whole numbers. Now, why is this important? When we make unit cells to describe the structures of ionic compounds, ions, okay, or atoms can occupy these different positions: corners, edges, faces, or body. And one of the things you're going to need to do with unit cells is you'll look at a unit cell and then you'll need to tell me how many atoms of this type are present in one unit cell. So here's what we do mathematically. To figure out the number of atoms that we're going to have, we're basically going to take the number of surfaces and multiply by real estate. So again, number of surfaces times real estate will equal the number of atoms. So if you have an atom in a unit cell that occupies a corner position, in total on one unit cell, that will represent 1 atom. And the more of these you'll do, you'll recognize these patterns. Corners are going to comprise 1 atom. Edges, 12 times 1/4, are going to represent 3 atoms. Okay? Faces, 6 times 1/2, will also represent 3 atoms. And then body, because it's not shared at all, you just count the number that are present in a body. And again, that will be one or more depending on how many are present. So why is this important? What kinds of problems might you see? I'm likely to show you some kind of a picture of a unit cell, and you're going to see atoms that occupy these different positions. You're going to then have to determine how many of each kind of atom are present in a unit cell, and maybe use that to determine, an empirical formula of an ionic compound, or determine which salts could this be based on, for example, a 1-to-1 ratio of cations and anions. Well, that could be sodium chloride, but not magnesium chloride. Okay, and we'll have an opportunity to play quite a bit in lab with these, but I kind of wanted to highlight what we tend to see these pictures looking like then. Okay, here is, for example, a unit cell where I only have corners occupied. Here I've got corners and body occupied. Here I have corners and faces. I don't have any right here where it's corners and edges, but I'm going to show you a few of those in just a minute, and we're going to build those in lab. The main difference between these guys is sometimes you'll see unit cells drawn like this where the atoms are really small and it looks like there's a lot of empty space, but that's just to help you see what's there. The reality is that the surfaces of these atoms are going to touch one another. When I say surfaces of atoms, it's really the electron clouds surrounding the nucleus of these, or the nuclei of these atoms. And so when we look at things and build models in lab, you're going to see things that look like this. We're going to build them with spheres, and the surfaces of those spheres are going to touch. And depending on the kind of unit cell that we draw or build, we're going to be making things where atoms occupy corners, they're going to occupy edges, they're going to occupy faces, and they're going to occupy the interior. And we're going to see lots of different sort of permutations of how to build atoms in this regard. So what I'll do for each of these questions is I'll read the question, I'll sort of show you with a clearer picture what you're supposed to be grabbing from your box, and then I'll walk you through sort of what it's supposed to look like when you're done. Then you guys will go and build it, we'll check it as your instructors, and then we'll be ready to move on to the next step. So first question here says, using the template with an A in the upper left-hand corner, we're going to build a simple cubic unit cell using clear spheres. Your job after you build this is to think about how many clear atoms are present in your unit cell, remembering to take into account the fraction of each atom that's contained in your unit cell. Okay, so question 1 here. If we are looking at what you're going to grab from your box, you're going to grab the A template, and you'll see that there's this yellow dot here, which means you grab the yellow white brick in order to be able to put your pins in. So that's what you're going to grab. All right, so here's just showing sort of a 3-dimensional version of this. This is what it should look like when you're done. So I want everybody to build that. Okay, to build these, again, you're going to put those pins in the corresponding holes. It says to use 8 spheres, and then we're determining for this cubic unit cell how many atoms are present. So go ahead and do that. We'll pause the video here before we go on to question 2. Make sure everybody has this simple cubic unit cell built. All right, our second question here says, now we're going to rebuild that primitive unit cell. So we're still going to use this same A template, and we're going to use those 8 spheres, but now we are going to put a green sphere in the center. And then here is the question you want to answer sort of after that. So let's see again what we're going to do here. So we're still going to use this same template setup. So we're going to have 4 rods in the positions that are indicated there. And after you build that, here is what it should look like. Okay, so again, we still have those 4 rods. We still have the 8 clear spheres, but now we have put this green sphere in the center. Okay, shouldn't take too long to just sort of throw that in there, but now we're asking the question, how does that change how many atoms we have in this cell, and how does this change the fact that some of those atoms are clear and some of them are green? So we'll go ahead and pause the video, and then we'll let you guys build that. We'll check it out, and then we'll move on to the next one. So question 3 has you construct a body-centered cubic cell. We're going to use the B template, and the corresponding block. So again, that is going to be, here's the B template, and it says we need to use a green block. Okay, and what you're going to have there is we are going to be putting spheres actually at the corners, and then you're going to put, I'm sorry, not spheres, rods, and you're going to put a rod in this center part here. Okay, so let's take a look at what that movie will look like here. So again, you can see that you've got 5 rods here. So let's go ahead and we'll play this one. Okay, and so when you've got this rod in the center now you're going to have the 4 spheres on the outside. We have body centered there, and then you're going to have 4 cubes on top. So go ahead and make that one. And once you've made that, you're going to answer the questions that are associated with it. And generally, this is counting the number of ions that we have. So again, how many clear atoms now are present in that unit cell? So we'll pause for a second, let you work on that next problem. Okay, question 4 says to remove all of the metal rods from the A template, and then again, we're going to replace it with the C template. Okay, they're going to use the same white block, okay, but now we're going to have 9 metal rods in the shaded area, and we're going to make a face-centered cubic cell using these clear spheres. And again, there's going to be 14 clear spheres that are required. Again, always answering the questions thus far, how many clear atoms are present? So let's go ahead and look at what that one's going to look like. Okay. So again, we've grabbed the C block. You can notice there's that yellow dot there, meaning we're going to use that yellow white block, which is the same white block we used when we had the A piece of paper. And again, putting things into this, we're going to see that there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. We're going to have 9 rods that we have here. So let's play this and see what this looks like. Okay, so 9 rods, essentially forming a cube of rods. Okay, and we're putting things on these ones that are sort of on the faces. So that's going to allow us to put face pieces here. So hopefully this makes sense to you. We know that we've got 8 corners and we know we've got 6 faces. So this is why we are going to have 14, 6 plus 8, of those white cubes. So go ahead and build this guy, have one of your instructors sort of check it out, and then we are going to count, again, how many clear spheres we actually have in one unit cell. Pause it for you to finish working on this one. So that one that we just built in number 4 is called a face-centered cubic cell. Okay, so now we're going to rebuild this. Okay, but we are going to put blue spheres in all of the octahedral holes. So I'll sort of point out where those are. And again, if blue spheres represent sodium cations, clear spheres represent chloride anions, we'd like to know what is the stoichiometry of that sodium chloride unit cell. So let's take a look at what that one should look like. So remember, we're rebuilding this. We're still using that C block. We're still using that yellow white block, and so I'm keeping everything essentially the same here. I've got those 9 rods that we have here. We're still going to have those 14 spheres, but now what I'm doing is these octahedral holes, and you'll see this when I play this. Oops, let's take the volume down here. These octahedral holes are basically going to be allowing us to alternate and put in these blue guys here. Okay, so you're going to put those blue guys in. You should recognize that that is going to allow us to occupy certain key positions along here. So the octahedral holes are going to occupy a certain key position. I'm not going to say what here, okay? But I'm going to lift this up here, I think, at one point so you can sort of see more of the inside, okay? So you can sort of see the inside and where things are sort of along the inside. These are the octahedral holes that we have here. Okay, I'll flip in a minute and we'll sort of show you a picture that we know we have for the cubic unit cell for sodium chloride as well. But go ahead and try to build this guy, and then we'll discuss it on the back end. So here from our lecture notes is a picture of the cubic unit cell for sodium chloride. So hopefully you can translate that to what we sort of had here. Let me flip back here for a second. So again, here, let me play this again. We can see that we're going to have these clear spheres, which are going to be the same as we have here. Let me see if I can move these, see them side by side. These clear spheres are on corners that we have here. These blue spheres represent what we see in dark gray here, so we can see those positions. Okay, and then we also have clear spheres that are occupying not only corners, but faces. Okay, and then importantly, when I'm going to lift this up here, see this guy right in the center there? Once I get this lifted up, you're going to see, right, that we've got a blue sphere right in the center there as well. Okay, so those are the octahedral holes that we're going to see on this guy. So one last little piece to add as to why these are called octahedral holes. Remember when we did our shape geometry stuff and we said if something had 6 electron groups, it needed to have an octahedral geometry. So if you look at sort of where these positions are, these gray sort of sodium cations, they are sort of surrounded by, we're going to have corners that we have here on the top and bottom, and then it's going to have 2 faces here, and not shown, but on adjacent sort of cubic units cells, we are going to have additional faces that are going to touch sort of this edge piece. So we're going to have sort of 4 faces that sort of are responsible for sort of sharing part of this, right? We said the real estate for an edge piece was that it was 1/4, but even though it's not sharing anything with these corners, right? We have corners that are touching here, and then we're going to actually have 4 faces that touch. So let me imagine here that we've got something that sits on this edge, right? It's going to touch, and it's touching the faces of 4. Okay, so we got 4 faces, and then it's got this top corner and this bottom corner. So it's got 6 things that it's touching, 2 corners and 4 faces. And so that's why we call it an octahedral hole, because it is surrounded essentially by 6 things, 2 axial positions, and then we are going to have 4 equatorial positions around that inside. So again, what we just built there was a face-centered cubic unit cell with blue spheres and octahedral holes, and that's what we see for sodium chloride. So again, try to figure out what the stoichiometry of the sodium chloride unit cell is. Hint, you should know that. Okay, last one. We're doing another face-centered cubic unit cell, but again, those blue spheres aren't going to be there, and this is the most difficult one to build, so I'm probably going to have a demo of it for you to look at because it's really hard. All of these things tend to sort of fall out, but we're not going to be putting things in octahedral holes right now. We're going to be putting pieces in tetrahedral holes. So how you do that is you're going to lift up on a corner of the clear spheres and place a pink sphere into the tetrahedral hole. It's not going to be held together by a pin, which is why I'm going to just show you the video for this one, because otherwise we're going to have these little pink spheres rolling all over the lab. I don't think you need to build this one yourself to be able to see it. But we are then also going to say that only 4 of the possible 8 tetrahedral holes are filled. And now we are actually going to be building the structure, the cubic unit cell for zinc ions and sulfide ions. Okay, again, think about what the stoichiometry would be, and let's go and take a look at how that's going to look once you build it. So coming back over here, movie for question 6. Okay. So here we kept all of those 14 spheres for the face-centered cubic unit cell. And now we didn't have those blue spheres sort of occupying the edges. We figured out from our last one that those were edges. What we did now, the edges represented octahedral holes. Okay, what we've got now with these little pink ones, and they're just set in there, those are in tetrahedral holes. And even though there's 8 tetrahedral holes, we only put 4 of the pink spheres in these tetrahedral holes. Okay, and what we're going to have now is a crystal structure or crystal unit or unit cell that we would see for zinc and sulfide. So here is a picture of what we just drew or what we just built for zinc and sulfide. So I'm going to play this movie again so that you can see we've got corner positions here. We're going to have face positions. So this is a face-centered cubic unit cell now with the tetrahedral holes being occupied. Why we call them tetrahedral holes, do you see how they're sort of connected to 4 other things like they're part of a tetrahedron? Okay, so I'm going to play this again and we're going to sort of see those same positions as it relates to this guy over here. Remembering those pink spheres that we just put in here, not attached to any rods, represent these zinc 2+ cations. So again, we've got faces here, faces, we've got corners, and so part of your job is to count how many atoms are represented by the clear spheres and the pink spheres, and then see if that is what you would expect for the formula for a zinc sulfide unit cell.